Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Leaders Circle, the podcast where we dive into candid conversation with visionary leaders driving impact across tech and business. I'm your host, Sukriti, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Deepak Visweswaraiah, who is the Senior Vice President and Managing Director of Pegasystems India. Deepak has led global engineering teams at scale and brings decades of experience in building resilient platforms, scaling innovation, and developing strong engineering cultures. In today's episode, we're going to talk about tech, team building, and leadership, and how developers can thrive in this evolving landscape. Now, let's dive in. Welcome to the podcast, Deepak. So delighted to have you here today with me.
Sukriti, I'm thrilled to be here. It is great to be part of the TechGig Leaders Circle and what you guys are actually doing here. I'm excited to be here. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks, Deepak. Okay, to begin with, you've had a long and impactful career in technology leadership, precisely from your current role at Pega to previous stints at major companies. How has your perspective on building high performing engineering teams evolved over the years?
Well, yeah, I mean, this one takes me back a while, right? In terms of when I started out in tech, like many of us, I thought, high performing team was actually all about, getting a bunch of coding ninjas, if you will, or being one of those for that matter. The kind who write, 500 lines of code in one go, fixing a product bug at 2 a.m., whatever, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that I used to at least think about, or at that point in time. But I think over time, having spent like 35, 40 years in the industry, has taught a few things in terms of, especially seeing many projects, seeing many deadlines go through, going through several fire drills, what have you. I realized that high performance isn't really about individual brilliance, and it's about how well the team works together when things don't go necessarily as planned. Right. And then one big shift in my perspective, in my mind, was kind of moving from how fast you can build something to how sustainably can we solve a problem. Right. And I've seen this. I've seen teams deliver features at lightning speed. They get it done in no time, and then they end up spending two sprints following in order to fix everything that they actually kind of broke. It's like building a, if I were to use an analogy, it's like building a house of cards. It looks great until you turn on the ceiling fan, and then you see the real things in terms of things falling off. So in my perspective, right, I look at three things from high performing team perspective. I think the number one is clarity, where in a team everyone knows why we're building something. It's not just about the what we're building; it's about the why we're building something. The now second thing is really trust. Developers feel actually safe in asking questions irrespective of what it is, without worrying about, oh, am I sounding trivial, am I sounding like a junior, or whatever the case may be. And the third thing is the rhythm. I think I call it rhythm, that the team is actually working in harmony, if you will. It's not about working late nights. It's not about it's really looking at in terms of going in a single direction, working together. If you were to think of an orchestra on a stage, really with minimal handoffs, less drama, consistent momentum in terms of delivering all of these things, right? um, there are so many examples that you would have. One of the teams that where this worked very well, that I saw, was a team that actually did a ritual that necessarily isn't part of your agile methodology, or wasn't present in Jira or anything like that, but they actually met for 15 minutes every week, and those 15 minutes was really to talk about what's blocking you, and that worked wonders for that matter, right? So in short, things as far as what's changed in my view, evolved from valuing only velocity and IQ, to really valuing clarity, safety, and rhythm. Right. Great teams really aren't made of like a high pressure hackathon all the time, but they are built with for everyday moments, being able to deliver consistent things. you high performing teams or those teams that win championships every year. That's really how you would look at it, right? So don't get me wrong. I mean, I love us to deliver at a very high velocity, but at the same time, it needs to be of high quality, and good consistency, for quality and maintainability. I still live by my favorite quote of Mario Andretti, who is an F1 driver, where he said, if the road is clear in front of you, that means you're not going fast enough, right? So I truly believe in that, but the best part, I think, when the entire team is in sync, the production outages feel like, more like solving puzzles and not like having a panic attack or, things like that. So I think that's the evolution I've actually gone through in my life, understanding what high pressure or high performing teams are.
It's fascinating. It's very interesting, and I quite like how orchestrated you've been throughout your career, Deepak. When it comes to focusing on the right elements, when you put up people together as a team.
Yeah.
Okay, switching to the AI, which is the biggest buzz in the market. With the rise of AI, cloud native architectures, and platform engineering, what core technical skills or mindset do you think developers need to prioritize today to stay ahead of time?
Yeah, I think this question is, very super relevant right now, I would say, right? I mean, without that, you can't really have a discussion, especially in reference to developers for that matter, right? If you look at the pace of change, yeah, that the biggest thing is, like, it feels like every, couple of months there is a new framework. Every few months there is a new, AI model. There is some shiny object that everyone is worried about, that everyone is actually rushing to, or talking about. It's like tech FOMO, in full emotion these days, and then that's what everyone seems to be, talking about. But but here's the thing, right? I mean, I don't think the winners are the ones who chase every one of those trends. I don't think you can keep chasing those trends all the time, right? I think developers who anchor themselves in some of the core fundamental principles, and then adapt the right mindset, I think will stay relevant no matter what comes, in the front. So if I were to break it down, number one, I would say, learn how to learn, in the first place. It- the technology will keep evolving. 10 years ago, Kubernetes wasn't a thing, right? Now it's practically table stakes for any cloud native operations for that matter, right? So the most valuable skill is not necessarily knowing every tool, but it's probably comfortable being, able to say, I don't know this yet, but I'm going to learn, right? When Chat GPT or LLM started, becoming mainstream, developers who kind of jumped in, leaned in, and then experimented, upskilled themselves, and they got a massive head start. And you don't really need a PhD to start all of these kind of things, right? I mean, you just need the curiosity, and the consistency of the mindset. That's what I would say, is learning how to learn. The second thing is understanding the why behind the technology. This is a big change in terms of everyone is talking about, let's say, microservices, or, but really, do you know the why does it matter? How does it matter for scalability or deployment independence in terms of building those, microservices as an architecture that you base on. Your platform engineering is the new buzzword, but platforms have been built for decades now, for that matter, right? But the core idea is to improve developer experience and the velocity through some of these tooling, right? So focusing on fundamentals, understanding the why behind the tech, knowing, the system design, the API thinking, observability, secure, coding practice for that matter. If we understand those well, I think, the tools will be so much more easier to pick up for developers, right? I think the third thing probably is, cloud fluency. You mentioned cloud native, technologies these days. I think it is, even you may not actually be a DevOps engineer. Not everybody is a DevOps engineer. but you need to know the basics of how your application actually, or your software or product that you build, how does it behave in the cloud. Things like in terms of stateless design, containerization, CI/CD pipelines, they're all part of the modern developers tool set, developers world for that matter. Otherwise, you end up building code that works well probably, but on your own laptop, maybe good for your kids or your mom or whatever, if it works well within your laptop, but not from a corporate perspective, right? And that's the third thing about cloud fluency. The fourth is thinking like a product person. I think this is very important to grow. This one I would say is probably even more underrated, right? Developers who care about user experience, who care about what the business impact and the outcome is, they usually stand out. If you can talk to a product manager, understand the why of a feature, why am I building, what am I building, how are our customers going to use it, and then potentially suggest better solutions, they are golden. They're golden resources, if you will, right? That kind of mindset is what makes someone, not just a coder, but really a good developer or a good creator for that matter, right? And lastly, I would say, to be able to stay grounded. Look, I mean, we all understand AI is booming. It's the latest, buzzword, and it's the latest thing that is going on. But not everything needs to be solved by using a large language model. Sometimes a simple solution and an if else condition can solve things better than a great API that decides, whatever the if your user is human or not, or what have you. But just staying curious, staying hungry, staying that the humble, keeping grounded. I think really takes you away from falling into the trap of I need to know everything, or I know everything, right? Instead, knowing what matters, and learning what you need to, I think helps a lot. At the end of the day, we still Google things, we still chat GPT things today, whatever the case may be. So it's not about knowing it all. It's about being able to learn what you need. I feel that's really how I kind of would look to break it down.
Fantastic insights, Deepak. I'm sure all the things, all the elements that you've outlined for our developers is something that they should actually adhere to, because when it comes from a leader like you, it becomes more authenticated and validated out of your experience that you're sharing with us today. So, moving on to the next one. Now, leadership in engineering often means balancing innovation with execution, and it's a great responsibility that the leaders of today have. How do you encourage your teams to take risks and innovate while still meeting the delivery goals?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, innovation is exciting, right? That's what everybody runs after. But execution is the way I look at it is, I mean, that's where real muscles actually get built. Is execution. Yes, innovation is great. It gives you that adrenaline to do things, and people love to run after the new things or what have you. But that execution is fundamental. That's how you deliver good things on a regular cadence, and that kind of what really allows you to run a business for that matter, right? It's a bit like saying you want to run a marathon because you like the medal. At the end of the day, you love that medal to get that medal, but then realizing that you've got to train in the rain, in terms of whether it rains or whether it shines or whether it is summer, whatever it may be, you've got to stay hydrated. You've got to stretch those muscles that you probably you never existed for that matter, for you. That is hard. And that is execution, right? Over the years I've actually learned, especially in product engineering, that the key is it choosing between innovation and execution. It can't be, right? It's about creating a system where innovation is part of your delivery. It has to be part of your culture, not a side project that you go do sometime after the release, or you carve out specific time for being able to do it. Yes, you can still carve out time, but it's got to be part of your culture. It's got to be part of your job that you do every day. right? An example I can probably, say a few years ago, we had a team, let's say, working on, being able to optimize a core piece of our platform as such, right? The roadmap was packed, tight deadlines, customer expectations, all the usual stuff, which is never, anything different than everybody else does. But a few engineers, in the team spotted an opportunity to kind of rethink a part of the engine, using a completely different, caching model that we, than what we were using. We thought it would be a lot more efficient, for that matter. Was it risky? Yes, it was. Was it on the roadmap? No, it wasn't really on the roadmap for that matter. But the team really came up with it, right? And then the good thing was the tech lead or the manager didn't shut it down altogether, saying, "Yep, can't do it because it's not going to fit in." But the curiosity and the willingness to, you know look to fail if we weren't able to. But how can you do it? Basically, the team came up with an idea that, they were going to try 2 sprints to prototype something, and without having to impact the roadmap, in any significant way. And what happened was that the new approach actually worked pretty well. Right? It, doesn't always happen that way too, but it cut our, latency significantly and simplified, some future technical debt we had. Overall, in the long run, actually, it helped us, in terms of shortening our time to deliver the entire, broader aspect of things, even though in short it might have actually taken longer. Then but even if it hadn't worked, the way it was structured, would allow the team to fail in a couple of weeks and move forward. If we weren't able to actually incorporate it into, that particular release or what have you. So the trick is in terms of ability to be able to do controlled experiments, and not necessarily get into these chaotic pivots, right? I mean, you change the direction from this to another one to another, where the team kind of gets, confused, in that sense, right? So, that actually requires, I believe, a really healthy balance of innovation and execution. And I try to do a few things, to balance them. One, I look to create, a space for low risk experiments, in your, day-to-day work. You don't need an innovation lab per se, but sometimes it's just about giving, some time, for the teams, to play with it, and have a quick POC, about what have you. It is about being able to celebrate, some attempts, not just outcomes. Yes, some things are successful, but to be able to take a few minutes to celebrate, even the ones where we tried something and failed, is actually a good thing. We learn more from, prototype that actually fails, than necessarily a backlog that may never change, right? So to that end. And then lastly, I would say tying innovation back to customer, and what, like, the pain that the team goes through, right? That kind of grounds everything that you do, right? Whether you are automating, test pipelines, whether you are experimenting a Gen AI feature, whatever, you need to link it to real value, to what you're delivering to a customer, right? So I look to encourage teams to think of, small bets, fast feedback, and don't, you don't have to build a spaceship every time, you embark on a new project or what have you, right? That's the thing, in my book. So innovation doesn't need to be wild or separate from your delivery process. It just needs to be, have supportive leadership for that matter. It needs to have some boundaries, and then little, give some room to breathe for people to be, creative and curious for that matter. Right. So, that combination of balance, I feel, works very well, in a real world situation.
Deepak, it's clear that you fostered a visionary mindset here, and you've trusted the teams you've worked with clearly. And with that visionary mindset, you've changed the games, for Pega. We all can clearly see that. Talking about the culture, the work culture here a little. which is often the make or break factor in any tech team, or rather, let's just say in any team. What are some key principles you follow to foster a collaborative and resilient engineering teams at Pega?
No, that's funny. Not a lot of people actually talk about it per se, right? We often treat culture, like this, I don't know, magical byproduct, something that just happens if you put a bunch of smart people in the room. But the truth is, actually, culture takes, building culture takes a lot of work, and not just a lot of work, but more importantly, a lot of intent. You need to work at it intentionally to build that culture, right? At Pega in general, all through my leadership for that matter, right, I've realized that the culture that you build will actually show up in tough situations, in those crunch moments. So if you're not deliberate about it, you will end up with something like I don't know, like an unplanned potluck or something like that, right? You have random, confusing, different types of food that nobody understands, and there is no theme to it or what have you, right? So that kind of stuff. Right? I mean, a few principles that I follow in terms of trying to build that kind of a culture is to have that psychological safety that I think is foundation. If people are afraid to speak, you've already lost your ideas to the most part. Right? We actively encourage people, even if they are juniors, fresh out of college, interns, what have you, to be able to challenge a design, to be able to ask the why, to offer a better way of doing things that they may have come across, what have you. There should be no, that seniority filter for good ideas, right? I often, make it a point to say you can debate a design, but not the person, right? That's the kind of thing that we would look at, and that small distinction changes the tone in meetings. When you foster that kind of culture, right? I've seen interns making improvements for components that have been there for years. For that matter, that's first. The second thing is, I think transparency beats perfection. Yes, it's good to have things perfect, but in a software world, there is no software you can say that has no bugs. Right? I would much rather have someone raise a risk early on so that we can actually work on it and then figure out, rather than they want to trying to figure out a solution in silence without the leaders knowing about it, right? So we encourage an open, stand up, blameless retros, honest conversations, even if it means to be able to say we screwed up. And it's okay to be able to say, stand up and screwed up, as long as we're not, you know, making the same mistake multiple times, and then we are learning from it, right?
Right.
So that's the second thing in terms of being able to leverage transparency and perfection. Third, I think is cross-functional collaboration, very important as a muscle, that we build, right? You don't build software in silos. Designers, testers, product folks, they all should be part of a conversation early, coming things together, right? They that's helped us kind of move from just building things right. I say, people talk about, yeah, you build things right, but I'm actually looking at building the right things as important, right? So when those things come together, you will actually build the right things, and in the right way, right? For example, if a team is building, a new onboarding portal, you would want to bring your, rather than throwing it over the wall to HR or DevOps or whoever, collaborating together actually is a much better way to approach it, right? And fourth, I would say is make space for fun and reflection. um, this one sometimes is underrated, like I talked about the product people before in the culture. Like we build things that are complex. We build things, complex. These are sometimes, they do become frustrating because they are complex as such, right? So we also need some space to breathe, some space to have that connection, with different groups for that matter, in an organization, right? How do you step back, celebrate, some of these wins, celebrate some of those conversations, taking those moments of, you know, um, success to be able to build trust, right? And then so you have to take those retros seriously, not just as a checkbox or something like that, but to be able to really look at it like a pit stop in a Formula One. I mean, I'm a Formula One fan, so you can see some of those analogies coming through. It's like a pit stop in Formula One where you don't win just by speeding. Speed is not the only criteria, right? There is a lot of strategy that goes behind where you stop, when you stop, what kind of tires you use. All of those things comes together, and you win by learning what to tweak before the next lap or what have you. So thinking through that, yeah, so culture isn't really about just posters or pizza parties or what have you. In my books, it is that intent, and how your team behaves when things get tough, how decisions are made or what have you. So in Pega, we often say it's about being bold, being collaborative, and keeping the customer in the center of everything that we do. But really, it's about treating people like people and not just any resource for that matter, right? Creating that kind of space where good engineers become great teams eventually. I think is the way to look at it. In my perspective, especially from a culture perspective, which is very important.
Awesome. So these were pillars that you function basically at Pega with Deepak. Now, speaking of these elements, these pillars, you've led teams across geographies and time zones, I'm sure. And how do you ensure, you have a great alignment, motivation, and mentorship across such diverse and distributed teams?
Yeah, leading global teams, this is probably one of the most rewarding things. I mean, I've had teams report that work for me from in various different geographies, whether that's US or Europe or Asia, what have you, all different time zones, right? But let's be honest, this is also one of the challenging things of engineering leadership, and I would say, right? Sometimes hopping time zones, is pretty difficult. It is challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding, right? Leading these global teams isn't just about the time zones or the Zoom fatigue in terms of how many of those virtual meetings do you do in a day, but it's about finding the rhythm, and then that works across. We talked about team culture. Here, you're actually talking about global culture of your organization that actually builds across different local aspects of things, right? So there is culture, there are career levels, and there is communication styles, right? Those all come into picture when you actually have when you're leading global teams, right? And I think here is the reality, if you will, right? Great teams really don't just magically align just because they're all on the same conference call or what have you, but you have to really work towards making them or getting them together, right? I believe the key thing in making such global teams work, irrespective of where you may be in terms of where you are located, is really to have and practice what I personally refer to as enterprise leadership mindset. I think you have, as a global leader, you have to have the enterprise leadership mindset to kind of make that work and very well. So let me break down what I mean by that. I believe there are three parts to that enterprise leadership mindset, that if you will. And the number one is alignment. Essentially, in over communicating the why, especially in global settings, right? People just don't need to execute tasks. They actually need some context, especially these days. I think the teams need the context. If someone is fixing a bug, or shipping a feature, or completely rebuilding a piece of infrastructure, whatever they may be on, they need to understand why does it matter, why am I doing this, who are the customers. That sense of purpose, I believe, actually helps teams align, even even if they are thousands of miles apart. They may be in different locations. So I'm a fan of, like, frequent lightweight rituals in terms of asynchronous updates, cross team demos, short videos of leaders, explaining the direction, what have you, things that go beyond the usual, agile practices, Jira comments, whatever. I mean, it's not fancy stuff, but intentional communication, right? I think that's what brings alignment, and the alignment isn't just top down. It also is horizontal. I think that is
Horizon.
important, right? Getting product design team, the QA team, and the developers, co-owning the outcome. Everyone working towards a single outcome, and then not just artifacts. I think you want people to feel like they are on the same ship.
Yeah.
How the ships actually have lifeboats. Lifeboats can be done separately, but you want them to be building all of those components or the lifeboats all together, so they fit in the same ship, and the ship goes in the same direction, for that matter, right? So that's number one in my thinking in terms of alignment. I think the second factor is motivation. In a law in a global setting, if you are a global leader, you have to be able to personalize it, right?
Mhm.
And then you have to make it local, and it can't just be all global,
Right.
because different things actually mean a little bit different in different cultures, for that matter. And you have to be able to understand that, right? And so I feel that motivation is local, to a large extent. A junior developer might be really excited by learning opportunities, versus a senior architect, located somewhere, might actually want technical autonomy in being able to decide things on their own. What works in Hyderabad, might fall flat, in our Krakow facility in Poland, for example. So, I always try to encourage managers to kind of get curious about their teams, especially teams, cross-functional, cross-geographic teams, in terms of understanding what excites them, right? What drains them, for that matter. Sometimes that motivation is about giving some space, to run a side project, to be able to, not schedule meetings in a particular, time frame when it is not convenient, what have you, right? And then you cannot underestimate the impact of that kind of peer recognition. Those kind of shout outs, or recognition of these kind of things appreciates, the teams do appreciate it, right? That actually helps a lot, in providing that motivation. And the third, actually, I would say, is mentorship, right? Building that, culture into, building that mentorship, capability into your culture, and then not just, run it as a separate program, on a particular time in the year, is not good enough, right? I mean, it's got to be part of your culture. Building that into culture, it doesn't have to be formal. In fact, most of the mentorship, to be honest, I've seen work, is in terms of, day-to-day work, right, in doing code reviews, in having hallway chats, in collaborative debugging discussions, right? One of the most effective things I've actually seen work is when, some of our senior engineers taking a 30-minute, a week, to walk juniors through, how they approach a system design, how they go through, a design pattern problem, or how they go through a system design problem, what have you, in being able to walk them through, an architecture like that, as to why they go about building something like that. I think that provides a lot of thinking in our process, and it's not just about teaching. It's about modeling how to think, right? And that comes through that mentorship, and it's not one directional by any means. I've learned a lot of things from talking to, newer engineers who ask very simple questions, for that matter, right? And then you just have to make it a safe place to ask such questions, and then make it a safe place to, get to know it, right? So In my view, if I were to sum it up, if you were to lead globally, I think clarity scales in that global environment. Empathy connects in terms of how you know the local cultures and what actually makes a difference, and the trust to establish is your currency across different cultures, across different locations. In your role as a global leader, and if people understand the mission and they feel kind of valued in what they bring to the table, they know someone has their back, and then they all come together and do their best work. Typically that's kind of what I've seen, irrespective of where they're located, right? Whether Singapore, Sao Paulo, or cafeteria in Bangalore or Hyderabad, for that matter. That's the way for them to come together.
Okay, I think the very important, one of the most important elements that you mentioned about prioritizing, giving prominence to these teams, right? I think it is the biggest boosters for people to work in a collaborative environment, considering that they hold importance for an organization, and they're putting so much of effort and contribution, and it's being recognized. So clearly, some very fantastic elements you've brought in for us, Deepak. Before we wrap up, a quick one for our listeners who are mid-level developers, or let's just say aspiring tech leaders. What's your biggest piece of advice for them as they look to growing into engineering leadership roles in the next few years?
I love that question, right? How do you go from writing code to leading a great team, for that matter, right? How do you make that transition? You know, First of all, if somebody is thinking about this, I think they're already a step ahead. Starting to think about it is actually being a step aside, ahead in that sense, right? Leadership, in my mind, isn't really a title that appears magically, one morning. When your manager shares a new title or something like that. It is, I think, something that people grow into deliberately, right? Sometimes I think of it as a well-written API, if you will. An API that is intentionally designed to work in a particular way, and something that is frequently practiced and then refactored, for that matter, and tuned over time. Right? I will share my own story in terms of how I learned this a little bit of the hard way, a long time ago, but I think it is still pretty relevant, for that matter, right? The real turning point to me came during product review a few decades ago. I was part of this team. We had built this beautifully architected solution. I was the technical lead. I was an individual contributor, the technical lead for this, feature functionality. We were very proud of, I should say I was very proud of this very well architected, solution. We thought it was super scalable, had all the right design patterns, what have you, and we were ready with the feature, and we were showing a demo, right? And the business, we set up this meeting to be able to share it with the right stakeholders, and the business leader came in and looked at the demo and made a comment, said, this is great, it looks great, but you know what, our customers don't really care about this feature. You wasted your time building something that I can't do anything. It was one of the humbling moments when I realized I had optimized for everything but for an impact or an outcome, right, as a business outcome. After that, I started sitting on customer calls. I was shadowing, product people, product teams, even reading occasional sales, pitches, sales decks, or what have you. Yes, willingly, I spent, time kind of doing that, invested myself, my time in being able to do that. And I found that the more I understood the why, the more valuable my technical decisions actually became. So much so that I decided at that point in time I was actually going to take my time out and go do an MBA, for that matter, to understand the business impact. And I went and actually, went there and then did my MBA, and kind of realized it wasn't just about how we built this, and the question actually became, should we build this at all? And then does that make sense to build it? What value are we creating, right? That's when I believe people stop seeing you as a person who delivers, and then start really seeing you as a person who shapes directions, from a leadership perspective, right? So here is the advice I usually give mid-level developers who are eyeing that leadership over the next few years, right? Number one, I would say start leading before you have the title. Leadership isn't really about a manager badge, isn't really about a fancy LinkedIn update or what have you. It starts with things like what mid-level developers do. It's about owning features end to end. It's about mentoring newer teammates. It's about factoring or facilitating design discussions. It's about unblocking others. It's not about yourself. you know and then it's actually a lot about others. Learning leadership, it's a lot about others and not about yourself, right? You don't need permission as a mid-level developer, having spent a few years to step up. It's just the willingness, I believe, to help the team succeed, and not just about being a success yourself, right? I mean, that's the first thing, to look at leading before you even have the title. Number two, I think, which is very, very underrated, is investing in communications. And I mean this seriously, investing in communications, especially in global organizations where we have, GCCs that are essentially spread over geographically, really distributed teams working together from different languages, who have different preferences of local languages and culture and what have you. Investing in communication is a serious effort. I believe as a leader, you are explaining decisions, you're presenting trade-offs, you're resolving conflicts, you're aligning different people all the time, right? And then being technically brilliant, but unable to really communicate, is of really no use. That's like writing perfect code that no one can really run, for that matter. It's like the project I talked about. Yep, you went and built a great feature, but nobody can use it. Right? Practicing, explaining complex ideas in a simple form, being able to communicate that, writing better, Slack updates, WebEx updates, what have you, giving the right context in your PRs, as simple as that, right? Those are soft skills today that will be core skills for tomorrow.
Right.
I think that's an incredible, underrated, skill that people would want to take seriously. And third, I would say in terms of for mid-level developers, is to learn to zoom out. Very often, leaders, mid-level developers are great at solving problems. So they get deep into solving a problem.
Hmm.
But as a leader, what you want to get to is to, what I referred to earlier, is choosing the right problems to solve. Rather than solving a problem, how do you get to a level of asking or choosing the right problems to solve? That's when you start asking questions like, what impact does this solution have, right? Is this the best use of our time? Should we really be investing in this as a business? What's the long-term cost, or what's the long-term implication of being able to do it? That mindset shift, really what I talked about in my own experience, right? As far as being able to bring some of that, business mindset, which actually makes your technical decisions much, much more impactful, right? That's the third thing I would say, right? And then fourth is building people muscle. As a mid-level developer, you're great about caring about yourself, about what you do, right? You also need to learn about how to give feedback without really, you know, um, without really, impacting other people's understanding, and then without really being too harsh about it or what have you. How do you give without being, personal about it, right? How do you resolve disagreements? How do you motivate people? What do you, as a leader, you've got to really handle these things even when under pressure. That doesn't necessarily become, say, you become super formal. You still want to be human, but you can actually encourage others and then build that people muscle. Sometimes your biggest contribution to the team isn't really solving a bug, but it's about helping someone in the team believing they can actually solve the problem very well. Right. So that people muscle is important. And last, I would say, is being curious about the business. If you want to move into leadership from being a developer, learning how your company makes decisions, what matters to your customers, how do you work, how your work ladders actually, look up to the business outcomes, right? What do they do? So those things, right? If you think about it, I would say leaders actually sit at the intersection of technology, people, and business. It's that triangle. It's that intersection of the three things, right? Technology, people, and business. So I think that is important for mid-level developers to understand, and understanding that leadership isn't really a promotion, but it's really a responsibility in a way. It takes time. So it's good to reflect and grow, and seek mentors during that growth, and ask for feedback and learn from it. So yeah, I mean, it's good to write great code, sure, but also building great relationships, building trust, staying endlessly curious about things. And I think the best engineering leaders I've seen are the ones who have never stopped about being great teammates, for that matter, right? So that's kind of how I think about um, um, you know, really, as far as my advice to, let's say, mid-level developers thinking about leadership, for that matter.
Superbly crafted, Deepak. Thank you so much for all the insights, stories, and the practical takeaways that you've shared with us today. It's an absolute pleasure having you here in the Leader Circle podcast, as well as one of the leaders onboarded with us at the Leader Circle. How has been your experience with us so far, Deepak?
First of all, thanks for having me here. I think it's a fantastic pleasure to be able to talk to a wide audience that you cater to. I think TechGig as a platform attracts the entire community of developers, having an opportunity to share some of the experiences of learning over 35 years, 40 years, what have you. Is a great opportunity, and thanks for providing that opportunity. The journey over the last few years of working with TechGig and your entire ecosystem has been a great experience, and I've learned a lot of things, for that matter, through that journey, and look to continue to do that. I look forward to having such opportunities and be able to work together, especially in an ecosystem where we have such excitement and technology advancement going on. I mean, there is so much going on in the world today, and even if have ability to be able to make a small impact for the audience is fantastic. So appreciate all the work that you guys do to keep the ecosystem going, and I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepak. We also look forward to your presence in the next quarters with some exciting inventories that we'll be doing for our developers. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and follow for more inspiring conversations with my leaders, shaping the future of tech. I'm Sukriti signing off. Thank you so much. Thanks, Deepak, once again.
Thank you, Shakriti. Thank you so much.